Hello, I'm joined by Laura Morrison, chairperson of the Women in ETFs Board of Directors, to discuss the growth of the ETF industry, what makes ETFs such a compelling tool for portfolio diversification, and how the role of index providers continues to evolve. Laura, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you, Kirsten. It's great to be here. I look forward to our conversation on indexing and ETFs and what happens after that.
Absolutely. So let's dive in. You've played a pivotal role in the growth of the ETF ecosystem. What stands out to you most, and where do you think the industry is headed right now?
Well, thank you for that. Yes, I'm best known for the work that I've completed at exchanges, iconic brands such as the New York Stock Exchange, CBOE, as well as Euronext, and many of the acquisitions throughout the process around the world, building the ETF listings businesses. So while I started at the New York Stock Exchange many years ago, I pivoted into the ETF space in 2008. And at that time, there were 1,500 ETFs globally, equaling about 750 billion in assets. Today, fast forward, there's 14,000 ETFs globally, representing 16.8 trillion in assets. The growth has been amazing, particularly in the past few years.
That is just incredible. So ETFs have become such a major tool for investors. What about them makes them so efficient and just such a popular way to diversify a portfolio? Because I think diversification is what people are after in these times of uncertainty.
That's true. And it's such a common question to receive. And the general investing public still everyone doesn't necessarily know the answer to that. So it's fourfold. One, of course, is it's exchange listed, and you can buy and sell throughout the day when you choose to do so, when you want exposure to a particular asset class, or when you want to sell off that exposure and move out of that position. There are also tax benefits in some instances when you compare the ETF and the mutual fund. You make the decision on when you sell, and therefore the tax implications are your decision. In addition, there's the transparency. On every issuer's websites, the holdings are updated every single day, so you know exactly what you're investing in. You know those underlying components of that index. So, and the fourth point is there's typically lower management fees. So accessing all types of asset classes is less expensive using the ETF wrapper.
So I want to talk about endless choice. A lot of people in the industry have talked about ETFs or just index products as kind of the grocery store of options for investors. What does that mean?
Endless products and duplicative products so that you can compare and contrast on what you decide to be the best one. There's really interesting tools that are being developed so that people can actually have all that information at their fingertips. And you can just ask it a simple language question and it will give you the response so that you can decide amongst the list of all those competing products.
So one way I look at endless choice is and I know index products are the statistical measurements, right? They're separate from the investment vehicles, the ETFs, which, those are two separate concepts. But when you think about as an investor or consumer, right, you're decorating your financial house, putting it in order. I think of the index products as, you said they're duplicative, but those shades of beige, if you're trying to decorate your house, where there are just so many different colors that feel the same, but they're slightly different. So there just really are, I think, over 3 million different index products out there. So if you're organizing your financial house, picking out that color of ETF and the index wrapper, it's really just so many different choices out there.
I totally agree. And I think that's an incredible analogy. I think that's very well said in terms of just the breadth and scope of what's available. Like I mentioned, 14,000 products available globally. And we haven't even started talking about tokenization.
Absolutely. And it doesn't have to be a boring shade of beige. They could also be colorful leopard print, whatever you want, right? There are something for everyone, I think. So you've guided hundreds of ETF issuers through product launches, which is just so impressive. But what do you think is the most misunderstood challenge in that launch process?
There's actually three. I'm going to start with the third one and work my way up to the first one. So the third one, and these are long time challenges that we have been trying to solve for. One is certainly at launch, particularly given the proliferation of ETFs out there today, is the ability to secure a market maker and seed. Seed no longer typically comes from the market maker. They're all filled up with what they want to invest their seed money in. So it's a bigger challenge. It's a hurdle to that launch, that date of launch. Second is certainly the need to make sure you have a long-term marketing plan, marketing and distribution plan that you stick to, that you also include your partners with, particularly the index companies and the exchanges, because their investment in that product's basically recognition around the country in which it launches in is also beneficial to your bottom line, that index provider's bottom line, and the exchange's provider's bottom line. So putting together a real concrete, achievable marketing and distribution plan is one of the main reasons I've seen ETFs fail, is because that hasn't been done.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's not that difficult. It really isn't. You just have to be organized and persistent. Lastly, but which is the number one reason I've noticed, especially as issuers are converting mutual funds to ETFs, is unfortunately, incentives aren't necessarily aligned between the marketing team and the sales team. When you align those incentives, amazing things happen, because you're not having that finger pointing that goes back and forth if there's, milestones that aren't met in terms of levels of assets. Having those incentives aligned is just really critical, and that's a very different state of mind typically in an asset manager who's only issued mutual funds in the past.
So you're kind of bringing the Venn diagram circles together of the sales and the marketing, and I think that is very applicable across industries. I think that's something a lot of organizations are looking for, that synergy to have the incentives aligned to be able to move the needle forward. So
again, pretty
that's
basic
really interesting
stuff. Pretty basic stuff, but sometimes hard to put into place given all the personalities involved.
Absolutely. So Laura, one question I had for you, oftentimes people think about indexes and passive investing, but they're also very relevant in an active sense. Can you talk about the role of indexes in both of those contexts?
Absolutely. So particularly in the active area, certainly the underlying holdings are actively managed, but it needs to be compared to a benchmark. So that index is really critical to use as a monitoring tool to see if in fact that active product is outperforming or not. And secondly, they're important, just as important for single stock products, because you need to have that transparency of pricing available on your systems as you're looking to trade. So you know what the bid and ask is, but what is in fact the proper price. Lastly, indices are really critical for things such as commodities in particular, for new products that are coming to market where there isn't a pricing mechanism that's available. So building that index, new products such as, for example, the price of copper, or for example, certainly the price of gold, and there's other indices that are very important in that environment, but in new and innovative products, putting together that index to make sure that it's totally reliable, maybe to the price of diamonds, that is a critical component to commodity-based ETFs. So, it is the thread that is relevant and important in every type of wrapper.
So I think that really does encapsulate the space of indexes in the ecosystem, right? The measurement, the precision, the independence, that all this other, the rest of the ecosystem exists side by side. So Laura, you've worked closely with index providers throughout your career. How do you see the role of index providers evolving? And what is the value of having independent index firms that are kind of separate from the ETFs?
It's absolutely essential. It's important that what is happening within the index space is kept confidential in terms of really important decisions being made for the investing public, of which the issuer provides that access. But I think one other thing that we also want to mention that we touched on earlier was indexing is the consistent thread throughout like modern investing. I mean, how
It is a quilt, if you will.
it really is how, you know, it's evolved over time, but it's like it is the very important piece of what we are trying to accomplish, whether it's in a mutual fund, whether it's in an ETF, or whether it's tokenized.
And the index is almost like the measurement for that quilt, if you will, because the index is the statistical measurements. The index doesn't have funds, it's just kind of the mathematical computation. And I think if you're managing these funds or invested in an ETF, you want to know that there's the credibility that that measurement is third-party neutral and independent, right? That you can have confidence that it is precisely measured. Because when you're building a quilt, I actually have never sewn one, so it's just an analogy, but it needs to be mathematical, it needs to piece together with precision, right? And so the index firms are that kind of precise measurement that's tied together with the ETFs. There's a lot of, I think I used to conflate the two, but the ETF is separate from the index and they're both really important.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for joining me today. This is really informative and just so grateful for your time.
Thank you, Kirsten. This has been fun.
Thanks, Laura.